Welcome everyone to episode 48 of the move.crush.count podcast presented to you by J&L Marketing. I'm your host, Scott Joseph. We have a great show for you today. We're joined by best-selling author of 5 books. She's a radio host. She's an entrepreneur, Samantha Ettus, who's going to be talking to us about how to bring a winning idea to life. She comes from a lot of experience when building Park Place Payments. She knew nothing about this vertical when she started it, and it is a thriving, highly successful business today. So you're going to make sure you want to listen to what she has to say. I want to thank you, Samantha, for joining us, and welcome to Move Crush Count.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Scott.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. So for the people that don't know you, you've got podcasts, you've written books, you've started this great company, and I'll sing your praises a little bit. It's already in its infancy. You're looking at working, 100 million, you're already up to 100 million annualized transactions that you guys are processing. And I'll let you explain the business and all that, but that's an incredible start for such a short period of time.
Yeah, no, we're growing fast and furiously, and it's really an exciting time for Park Place. And yeah, I could talk on and on about it. It's very fun.
Well, we're going to let you. So, all right. So tell us a little bit, tell us your story, how you got started, what's your background, what's your experience, your education level, and then we'll dive into a lot of questions on all this.
Sure. Well, I had a very unusual childhood. I was a Division I tennis player. So my whole childhood was spent playing tennis. And then I played in college competitively, and I played number 2 singles at Harvard. And then when I graduated, I went into Hollywood. I was a Hollywood assistant for a couple years. Then I really loved media. So I worked in magazine publishing for a couple years. That was actually my first sales job, as I was selling advertising for a magazine called PC Computing Magazine, which was a huge magazine at the time. And I learned so much about sales there. And actually, it's funny because I draw upon that job, even though I was so young and it was so long ago. I draw upon those skills in what I do now in selling payment processing, because I think that no matter what you do in life, you need sales skills. It really doesn't matter what career you choose, but you always need those sales skills. So anyway, then I was kind of obsessed with learning every part of media. So I'd worked at a film company, I'd worked at a magazine publisher, and then I went to work at a TV network. I worked at Nickelodeon for a while, and then I went to Harvard Business School. I got my MBA, and at the time, all of my classmates wanted to be in banking or consulting or private equity. And I knew I wanted to do something on my own. And so at the time, and now entrepreneurship is very popular at HBS, but then it wasn't. And that year I graduated, I was the only entrepreneur in my class. And I started a company that was a personal branding firm. And we represented CEOs and experts in different fields and helped them shape their personal brands through press and speaking engagements and board involvements. And that led me to create a book, which was called The Expert's Guide to 100 Things Everyone Should Know How to Do. And to create that book, which I sold to Random House, I basically cold called 100 experts to write chapters on their area of expertise. So it was Bobby Flay on how to barbecue, and Susie Orman on how to save money, and Richard Branson on how to get a loan, because he started his first business with a loan. So I cold called all these experts, and then that book sort of, even though I'd only been working on it at night and on weekends, it became a bestseller. And based on that book, I got another 3-book deal with Random House. And at that point, books were a huge business. Like my book deal with Random House was very lucrative, and it was going to require me to kind of do that half time. And so I had to close my company. I placed all my employees in other places. I placed my clients with other people. And then I thought, okay, I'm just going to focus on the book series, because, I was making enough money to buy our New York City apartment. I thought, okay, I'll have books and babies, but I'm super ambitious, and that was not going to be enough for me. And along the way, I met a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk, who was, he'd written a chapter in one of my books on how to taste wine. And at the time, he had this show called Wine Library TV. And when we met, he said, okay, I'm going to make you into the next kind of the next star in my repertoire. So he created a talk show around me called Obsessed TV. And for a couple of years, I did the books and Obsessed TV with him. He would come on every episode. At the end of the episode, he'd share a glass of wine with me and the guest. And we did 75 episodes. The episodes were like an hour long each. It was kind of like Barbara Walters for the internet, but it was way early. So I think today that show would have been wildly popular. It was critically very popular, but it was not, it couldn't be an actual full-time thing because we just didn't have the ad dollars or any of it to sustain it, even though we had a great crew and great guests and the interviews were awesome. So anyway, over time, I really missed working with people, and I ended up going back to working with a lot of my experts and CEOs and realizing that you couldn't talk to them about what they were doing without talking about the elephant in the room, which was really how they were managing their personal and professional lives.
When you started talking about the book and interviewing all the different people, Richard Branson and so on, right? Do you feel like you learned more from that? I mean, from a branding standpoint and from a business standpoint, that had to be extremely educational and help you, especially so early in your career, where help you where you're at now. Did it or did it not?
I think, well, first of all, the thing about that book was that every person had to write their own chapter. So I didn't interview them. It was Barbara Corcoran writing a chapter on how to sell a home. It was, Rachel Ray on how to make a tailgate or whatever. These experts really wrote their own chapters, and I was the editor. So I learned a lot. I mean, I'll tell you a story about how I actually didn't learn extensively, which is that I was on a very big book tour for the first book, and Heloise, I don't know if you remember Heloise's Helpful Hints, but she's like this, I don't know, old school advice giver, kind of like etiquette person. And she had done a chapter on how to iron a shirt. And I have to admit, I never learned how to iron a shirt. Okay. So my dad in my house was the guy who ironed. And even when I would come home and stay in New York City with my parents for a speaking engagement, he would iron my dress for me. Now I got a steamer, so I don't need to iron or anything. I can just use my steamer. But anyway, at the time, ironing was not something I knew how to do. And I was on a Dallas TV show, and the publicist called me the night before. I was on the #1 morning show in Dallas to promote the book. And the publicist called and said, okay, just want to let you know, they want you to demonstrate. Ironing is a really big deal in Dallas. And they want you to demonstrate how to iron a shirt from that chapter. That's the one chapter they picked. So they're going to have an ironing board on set, and they're going to have an iron for you. And I thought, oh crap, I've actually never ironed a shirt in my whole life. And now I'm going to do it for the first time on air. I hope it's okay. So I convinced myself it would be okay. I would just talk myself through the segment, and they wouldn't really notice the ironing the shirt part, right? So we get on set, there's the iron, there's the two co-hosts, the morning anchors. And I start, ironing, going like this and going, pressing on the shirt, and then reciting what I'd memorized from the chapter, thinking I could distract them. And suddenly you see one of the male co-hosts is going he's waving his arms, and I left the iron on the shirt, and it started smoking. And the whole crew starts laughing. And I got off the set, and the camera person was like, that is the funniest thing I've actually ever seen happen on this show. I mean, the ironing expert who, couldn't iron the shirt and burned the shirt. But really, it was because I was not an expert in any of these things. I was just the curator of the experts who got them to share their expertise. So it was really funny. But yeah, I mean, I learned a ton from being with all those people. And with my first book, I was wildly ambitious. I was also, I was single. I didn't have my kids, so I was able to spend a ton of time on it. And I remember what I did was I would say to each of the experts, I'd tell them a little white lie and say that the publisher asked me to meet with each expert before the book's publication. So let's have lunch or let's have coffee. So I met most of the experts in person that way.
That's what a great experience. I'm glad you cleared that up because I misunderstood you from the beginning there. All right. So where do you live now? You're in California, correct?
Los Angeles. Yeah.
All right. So what made you choose that? Why California?
So about 11 years ago, I guess 10 years ago, my husband and I, we were living in New York City. We had a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And we were kind of like, we're like the only people that don't have to live here. There are, investment bankers that have to be in New York. There's attorneys that have to be in New York. But we were both, he's an entrepreneur. I was kind of a media person and entrepreneur, and I could live anywhere near a major airport, and so he was ready to cycle out of his last company. And I was, very mobile, and I was kind of excited to live in a place that was new. And so one night I wrote on Twitter, and I'm pretty active on Twitter. So I wrote, what's the most idyllic town in America? And I received 13 responses. And that night, he and I went through every single town that was offered to us. And one of them was the Pacific Palisades in California. We'd never been there. And that night we're like, okay, let's move there. And that's literally how we moved here. We didn't have any friends or any family, and we just moved.
You're a risk taker.
Yes.
That's in your nature.
No rewards without risks. That's what I think. Yeah.
So I have a standard thing I tell every single person for happy birthday on social media, like on Facebook or whatever. Yeah. And I always just say, happy birthday, happy birthday, ... take some chances. Right. And so I don't need to say that to you.
You could say, take more chances.
All right. And it kind of segues right into what we want to really talk about. And that's how to bring this winning idea to life, because I'm sitting here listening to your background and your experience, and none of it applies in the sense of specifics to the industry you're in right now. Right. And so talk to us a little about, I guess, first introduce the audience into what exactly Park Place Payments is and does. And then let's talk about how you started it and what gave you the idea.
Yeah. So, and I'm so glad you asked, because it's funny. I feel that everything relates to my background. Everything I'm doing today relates to my background, and I'll share why. But, when I did my last book, so when I recognized that all these CEOs and experts were having trouble with work-life balance, I did what I always do, and I wrote a book about it. And so I interviewed 100 people for my book. This time I actually did interview them, Scott, I have to say. I interviewed 100 top women in different fields. So it was like the president of Barnard College and the president of a huge fashion brand, and Gail King and Shonda Rhimes, and really women at the top of their field, to ask how they were doing it. And I found a couple of themes, and I also paired that with my own structure for how to order your life. And what I found was a lot of women had felt like they had to choose between having a family and a career, but that was because they've never been given a healthy framework for managing both. And so my last book, The Pie Life, gave people a healthy framework for managing their personal and professional lives by thinking of their time and their lives in slices. So there's 7 slices. There's your family, your career, your health, your hobbies, your friends, your community, and your relationship, or your quest to find one. And all of your things really fit into one of those 7 slices. And when you think of it that way, it's a lot more manageable than just thinking of it as this messy blob where everything is intertwined and you can't see your way out of it. And so my whole book was about that construction. And when I went on a book tour for that book, the one group of people I couldn't help were the women who left the workforce, wanted to get back in, wanted some flexibility. And even the ones that wanted a full-time position couldn't find one again because no one wanted to hire them after they left for 2 years or more. So a lot of those people started selling makeup and skincare and jewelry and clothing to their friends. They were selling Avon and Beauty Counter and Stella and Dot. And most people who work for direct sales companies like that, they don't even break even. They lose money because they're designed for someone at the end to be holding the bag. And I had been at this conference 10 or 12 years ago. And it was a conference, it was like a boondoggle for the top guys in the payment processing industry, which was an industry I didn't know anything about. And basically payment processing, any business from a hair salon to a yoga studio to a restaurant, any business that accepts credit cards has a middleman between American Express, MasterCard, and Visa and the business. And at that point, the middleman was 30,000 men, white men, and a lot of them were functioning like used car salesmen. And when I went on this trip, it kind of confirmed that.
Hey, wait a minute. Yeah. I have 3 dealerships now.
So they're a lot like you, Scott. No, but they're not owning the dealerships. These are the guys who are selling used cars. And I don't think you have any used car dealerships, do you?
Well, we sell used. Well, right now, that's all we can sell. There's
So
not
you
a
know
lot of
what?
new
I am
left.
turning down your Salesforce and I'm going to zip it right now. Anyway, so you know the industry well. So the weird thing about payment processing is that if you have Scott's Auto Body Shop, I have Sam's Car Wash, and we're on the same block, a guy named Rick will walk in and say, I bet I could get Scott to pay 2.8%, but I bet I could get Sam to pay 3.2%. And even though Rick is paying us the same, is selling us the exact same product, he's charging us two different prices. And when I was on this trip, all of these guys had arrived on private planes and they were all champagne toasting to the fact that the Durbin Amendment had just been passed. And it was an amendment that was kind of capping the fees that you could charge, that Amex and MasterCard and Visa could charge to small business owners. And these guys were toasting because they weren't planning on passing the fees, the savings along. They were going to keep it for themselves. And at that moment, I was like, one day I'm going to come back and crush these guys. There were no women, no people of color. And I thought, okay, one day I'm going to come back and crush them. But I thought, well, I'll do that when I'm 60 or 70. Like, I don't need to do it today. But then when I was on book tour for the Pie Life and I met all these people who needed an opportunity, I thought, what if I could train these people? These women are, real pillars of their community. They know all the local business owners. What if I could train them to sell payment processing to their kids' pediatrician and their dentist and their hair salon? And so I spent 2018 testing the model, went to 6 different cities to see if people with zero background in payment processing could sell it effectively. So we trained teachers and flight attendants and newscasters and an Olympic athlete, people in every different field to see if they could learn payment processing. And based on their success, I raised our first round of capital, which was our friends and family round, our angel round. And then we raised a seed round last year. And now we are just launching our Series A raise. So things have been booming ever since. And I have to say now our sales force is about 90% women. We have a lot of people of color. We have a lot of diversity in age, in race, in ethnicity, religion, everything you could think of on our sales force. We have doctors and we have teachers and we have retail workers. We have all different kinds of people. We have over 900 account executives in all 50 states.
What I love about your story and how you started this is it's such a great intersection of something you're passionate about, helping all the people you just described, right? Or giving them an opportunity to help themselves, I should say. And you also kept your eyes wide open and recognized an opportunity, and opportunities can come in business in a lot of different forms. I love Bezos's quote, like, your profit margin is my opportunity. And so you saw, you represent, you mentioned the bill that had got passed and not passing along those savings, but also, support. I know a little bit about your company in the sense that from the support and the customer support and the customer experience a lot. And as a business owner, I have to tell you, for processing payments, I'm a happy business owner when 2 things. When I never hear about you, right? Let's say you're my vendor. When I hear your name a lot, that means there's problems, right? And someone in finance is having issues, or I'm paying too much, right? And so those are the 2 things as an owner. But the people that are actually working with you all the time, depending on the client, I'm sure you deal with a lot of business owners as well, but some people you might directly deal with finance, I have to assume. The bigger the company, the more you probably remove from the top person. Whereas they're all about, not only are they, if they're in finance, they clearly care about the bottom line, but man, they also need their job to be made easier. They need their questions answered quickly, right? So what were some of the things? So I love the sales model, but before we can go into all this, I got to ask, what kept you from being like, I've never done this. I can't do this. I know nothing about this. What gave you the courage to move forward with this?
A lack of confidence, let's face it, has never been my weakness, right? So I thought, if not me, who? There were no other people stepping up to the plate. I did not feel like, listen, this is an industry, and I knew this from the guys I met on that trip. You did not need to be an expert in payments. You did not need to be an expert in technology to do good and help small businesses. And what I realized is you really had to understand your sales force and customer service. And at the end of the day, when I talk to merchants and I say, so tell me about your payment processor, they're like, oh, don't even get me started. I don't want to talk about that. It's like talking about legal fees or insurance, right? It's the headache part of the business. No one wants to hear about it. Yep. And I thought, what if we could actually give people a reason to love their payment processor? And that's always our goal. We have proactive every 6-week check-ins. We have we make sure everyone's PCI compliant, and we get that done for them. We do everything proactively, which is kind of the opposite of how our industry works, which is that you only hear from people when something's going wrong, or you only, you're on a 1-800 call for 3 hours. Like, we have all of our customer service in-house. So our customer service team knows your name. It's all personalized, and it makes you feel like you have a team behind you. And that was really important to me. And I think that, what occurred to me is like, I could hire for my weaknesses. And I always have done that. Like, I believe that the smarter the people you hire, the better you are. And so, I hired this head of merchant support who had been in the industry for over 20 years and run a huge merchant support department in her last job, and she's building out her team. And so I don't need to know how to service an account. I just need to make sure that I have people on my team who do. And so what I know how to do is sell. I know how to motivate people. I know how to deliver great customer service because I know what a client wants and needs. And I know how to build a brand. And so those were the things, like, I am very, very aware of the things I know how to do well and the things I don't know how to do well. And I think that that's what being confident is, right? It's not about pretending you know how to do everything or acting defensive when you don't know something. It's being really self-aware and confident enough to say, oh my gosh, I know nothing about that. Please explain it to me, educate me, fill me in. I want to do better next time. And I think a lot of, listen, as you know, Scott, running a company is humbling, right? I find out all of the mistakes I make every day, and every day I wake up hoping to do it better. It's a little bit like parenting. You're always making mistakes and you're like, I'm just going to do better tomorrow. And that's how I feel about managing a team and running a company is I learn and I keep moving forward.
Who was the first person you hired and why?
So the first person was our founding
not by name,
member.
Position. I should say position.
It's our head of product. And that was the first position. But I will say that, I hired like 4 people together because I knew we couldn't board merchant accounts without a head of merchant support, right? I knew that we couldn't function without a head of sales and someone who's managing account executives. So it's tricky because it's an unusual business in that it's not like I'm building some technology where I have engineers in a basement for 3 years and then we're going to finally launch a product. It was like from day one, when our doors are open, we need to be able to service merchants. We need people who can talk the talk. We need people who know how to board account executives. So, we're always sort of selling to 2 lanes of people. First is our account executives, because we're always recruiting new account executives across the country. And the second is merchants. And most of our merchants come from our account executive relationships. And then some of them, of course, come from our press. And as our brand has grown, they're incoming a lot more than they used to be.
Right. And so what I love, this goes back to hiring the right people, right? You brought up your product person. So this is probably because you recognized an opportunity, you had a passion for it, but then you realize, well, I don't know a lot about the product yet. I don't know the industry. So clearly I need that person. And started also, this is an example of you hiring what you don't know. Where did you find these people? And how did you know without being in the industry, how did you know where to look? And more importantly, exactly what you would need in a person?
Well, let's be clear, just like every CEO, I've made hiring mistakes. So I'm not going to sit here and say, I hired really well and I've never had to let anyone go. And it's still the founding team. Like, it is not like that, right? We learn all the time about what our needs are. And especially as we grow and we keep adding positions, we figured out what our needs are. And I think that we're really getting it right. Right now, we have a terrific team in all areas. I'm super proud of our team, but we're continuing to grow that team. And then when you grow, you have all these cultural challenges, and you have to make sure that everyone's gelling properly and that people are, sharing the workload and really collaborative. So those are issues too. And I think that that's part of growth, right? Like that's what's so exciting, but that's also the challenge that's our next phase, is that we're going to be hiring a ton in 2022. And we have to keep up our ethos and our culture and our work ethic. And I think that, because of my background, right? Like I was a child athlete. So I went to a very competitive academic school in high school where I had to do at least 3 hours of homework a day. So I would do practice for tennis for 2 hours, come home, eat dinner, do my homework for 3 hours, maybe, get in a couple phone calls with friends, and then go to sleep and repeat every single day, and then play tournaments every weekend. I've really been working since I was like 9 years old, essentially. So I'm someone who, when I worked in Hollywood as an assistant, I was the first one in ahead of anyone in the office. I was the last one out. It didn't matter if my boss was staying till 9 o'clock, I'd be there till 9:01. That is my work ethic, and that's my nature. So, I always feel like even though I'm a mom of 3 kids, I'm a wife, I'm a friend, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, and I'm a CEO, I find a way to get stuff done. And so I think that that's really important to me also when I hire, that people don't think of themselves as like 9-to-5ers, but they feel like they're members of the team. And that's why every single person who comes on board full time gets equity in our company. I want everyone to feel ownership over what we deliver.
I love you describing your work ethic, especially when you go back to a young age, because, for the people who have made it successfully and started their own thing, nothing happens easy. And a lot of people underestimate what it takes to be successful at a high level. And I'm going to assume that you did have to work very hard at a young age to get into Harvard. You're only the second Harvard grad we've ever had on the show. I love what you talked about there. Talk to us when you see people not succeed versus succeed. You're obviously selling to a lot of business owners, and we don't have to go into naming who's successful and who isn't. And you've talked and interviewed a lot of people throughout your career as well. What are some of the 2 or 3 biggest things that differentiate the highly successful from the average, in your opinion?
Oh my gosh, I love this question. And it's actually a really challenging one. I would say that I always hire for positivity over experience. So if I have a choice between someone with 20 years of experience who's a little bit negative, or someone with 5 years of experience who's super sunshiny, positive attitude, I'll always hire the positive attitude, because one negative person can spoil your entire culture. I think that the most successful people are not defensive when they hear criticism. The most successful people work super hard, and the most successful people have a positive attitude. And I think that having an always be learning mentality is critically important at any level, whether you are an entry level person, whether you're a recent grad, whether you're learning a new skill, or whether you've been in an industry for years and you're a VP, you still need to have that always be learning mentality to be the MVP of the company. And I think that's
I agree. I agree 100% with that. One thing I've noticed is I've seen employees at a variety of different companies. I've also interviewed a ton of managers, business leaders, and CEOs. And it blows me away how much the CEOs, especially the really successful ones, I would say their commitment to continually learning. And you would argue, some people would argue, well, they've already made it there, this and that. Their continuous improvement efforts on themselves blow me away compared to people that may wish it to happen or want it to happen and don't understand the importance of sharpening the saw on themselves, right? And improving themselves. So I'm glad you brought that up. I have to ask you, because you've got an aggressive growth strategy, like you mentioned, for 2022, want to hire a lot more reps. How has COVID, and because there's a lot of people struggling to find.
Oh, and I just want to stop you for 1 second and say that we don't hire reps. They're all 1099. So they're all account executives who are 1099. So they build their own schedule and they're their own boss. But we are hiring a lot of full-time people in 2022, in addition to like quadrupling and growing our account executive base. Yeah.
So I'm very familiar with that setup. So I'll rephrase how I say this. How do you either or employ or contract someone? Has COVID impacted you? Because there's a lot of people struggling to find a workforce or grow their workforce. How has that impacted either negatively or positively you guys?
So one thing is, I would say that it's improved the caliber of the account executives who come to us, because there's so many people now that recognize that they need more flexibility in their lives, men and women. I mean, every kind of person is recognizing, okay, how can I build my family's, recurring revenue? How can I provide for my family long term while also maintaining enough flexibility to pick up my child at school, or make sure I can be home if my kid is sick, or make it to the school play, or take my dog to the vet when they need me. I think people are recognizing the need for more flexibility in their lives. And so because of that, people are also recognizing, whether it's, even if it's not a full-time team thing, if they need a side hustle. So because of that, we've had a lot more interest in our account executive program than ever before at Park Place. And then I would say, in terms of merchants, like, what's crazy about the payments industry is it's actually sped up in terms of innovation over the last couple of years. So before COVID, a lot of businesses didn't have Apple Pay. No one wants to touch a dirty terminal anymore, right? Like, everyone expects a store to have Apple Pay. And so every time there's an advancement in technology, it's an opportunity for Park Place, because that means you're going to have to switch merchant processors because you're upgrading your equipment. So of course you might as well switch to the company that's going to offer better service, which is Park Place. So I think that it's helped us. A lot of companies that were just bricks and mortar are also recognizing they have to have an online option, because no one was going into stores for over a year. So I think it's changed a lot of things with payments and how payments are delivered and accepted. And that's provided an opportunity for us. So we are, and then I would say the last thing is that a lot of our companies are what I call the unsexy companies, right? They're the dental office or the medical offices. They're the HVAC companies, the plumbers, the contractors, the pool guys. Like, all of those people did phenomenally well for the most part during COVID. And so they're a little bit pandemic proof, our merchants. We have fewer, we do have restaurants, of course, but we have fewer hospitality and restaurants. Like, if you look at a company like Toast that focuses exclusively on restaurants and hotels, they let go of half of their staff during COVID. We continued to grow because we weren't relying on an industry like that. And so I would say that, yeah. So I think the biggest takeaway for me was, like, or I should say the biggest obstacle initially was saying to people, like, we're serious. A lot of people didn't take me seriously. I am, a petite woman who had no experience in the payments industry, which was historically male dominated field, right? So just by virtue
let me tell you, every male right now hears that, and all they're saying, all the ones that make up excuses, they're saying, well, that's your advantage.
They could think it's my advantage, but I will tell you, in terms of fundraising, in terms of a lot of other experiences.
Oh, I agree with you. I'm just saying that's what I listen to. Yeah.
But I will say
excuses.
That, the obstacles in terms of people taking me seriously, and maybe because I was an athlete, like, all of that just drives me more to want to be successful every time I face that. But I face it all the time, and people underestimate me. And I think, okay, go ahead, underestimate me, and you'll see what happens. And I think that even with my fundraising, convincing people that I can innovate without an engineering team. There is innovation happening outside of technology. And I would say that's my biggest obstacle, is convincing people that we can change an industry with people, not product. And that's what we're doing. I would also say the other huge obstacle I've faced is in terms of just realizing, and this is actually a personal obstacle also, like, when I did this research for this presentation I gave yesterday about disrupting with people, I learned something extraordinary, which is that more than 50% of successful company innovators have zero experience in that industry, which is extraordinary, right? More than 50% of people have zero experience, because you're seeing it from an outsider's lens. So I try to see that obstacle as a strength now.
I'm going to I'm going to ask you something right here on the show, and I want a yes or no, a quick yes or a quick no, no slow maybes. All right, I want to do a clubhouse room, and I love disruption with people. And I'll tell you why. So, in other words, I'm inviting you to kind of co-host that room with me one night. We'll schedule it where it's convenient for everybody, if you say yes. And that is because I was just at a conference, literally in Atlanta, and the auto industry. We have a lot of auto people because of my background that are in the audience, and it is extremely disruptive right now. And COVID really threw, everyone was already moving to a digital retailing, being able to buy online, but COVID really sped that up in this auto industry, in this vertical. And the number one thing people brought up when we were talking about disruption, things like that, were people in the processes. When we talk about the customer experience, there's so much technology out there, but there's so many people, no matter what industry you're in, they always look for this magic pill, this technology that's going to cure all their problems. And in the end, it's always the process and the people and the experience you create. And quite honestly, a lot of auto dealers, and I hope a lot of them are listening right now, the number one thing you can do to differentiate yourself is not technology. It's your people and your process and the experience you create with them. Right. And so I would love, I think it appeals across all industries with what you just said. And so I would love for us to get together one night in a few weeks on a clubhouse thing and spend an hour talking about that and let people just grill us with questions.
Yes.
Great. All right. That's awesome. All right. So here you are. You've got this winning idea. You knew it could be successful. You turned it into a reality. What's next for you?
It's funny you ask, because everyone always says, well, what's your next book? And honestly, writing books is, I think of it as like a luxury. Like it's like sitting at a pool, like, having a pina colada. That's how fun it is. And sort of decadent it is to me to write a book, because my focus, I will not allow myself to write another book until I make this company a giant success. And as you know, Scott, I have very lofty goals for that. And I'm aiming to create $1 billion company, and I'm aiming to change the way merchants interact with their payment processor and what their expectations of their payment processor are. And so until I make Park Place into that giant smash hit, that's all I'm focused on. Even my podcast, which is called What's Her Story with Sam and Amy, which focuses on telling the stories of the world's most extraordinary women, that podcast is owned by Park Place, because I want everything to be symbiotic with what I'm doing. So when I'm giving a speech, it's with the goal of increasing my brand awareness, which always helps Park Place increase our brand awareness. So everything I do is with the goal of expanding the brand of Park Place and our ability to service customers.
And I love that you throw around that $1 billion thing. And everyone talks about dream big, make big happen, and all this type of stuff. But you're serious about that. That's not a number you just kind of throw around. You've got a game plan for that. You do truly dream big. And it's funny. I had a meeting last night, and I'm not going to say with who or even the industry. And they're asking me for ideas on how to raise capital for this and that. And the numbers they were talking about were extremely small, I thought. All right. And I asked them why. And they justified it by saying, well, we've got to start small and go and be able to go here. And I thought, all I kept thinking about is, gosh, if that's all we ask for, that's the most we get. And odds are we're not going to even get that. And so I had to explain, it can be difficult to get someone to think big, to dream big and do big. For you, why is that? I don't want to say some of it might be natural for you, but is there a process? How does that happen for you?
I just think that, if you don't ask, you will never get it. And I think that with everything, and I've always believed that, like, listen, and I tell my kids this all the time, Do you know how many things I get rejected from for all the things they see? They see that we were in Inc. magazine this week and there's a big picture of mommy. They see that I just joined this board or whatever it is. They don't see all of the rejections, all of the no's. And there are so many no's for every yes. And so I think it's just about, I think of no as a slower path to yes. I also think that like every time I get a no, it's going to bring me closer to that yes. And I try to infuse that in my salespeople too, right? Because the most successful account executives are the ones who know that they might have to get 20 no's to get to a yes. But if you are, turned upside down by a few no's, you're never going to be successful in anything. And so I guess for me, it's like, if you ask for, $500, you're going to get 200. So if you ask for, $5 million, you're going to get 3 million. So it's kind of like what you were saying to these people last night. You have to at least start from a position of high expectations. It's the same with relationships. If you expect very little of someone, they're going to deliver very little to you.
Well, yeah, that was my point to him. I said, why are we setting up a strategy, an idea, or a concept to get this small amount? Why wouldn't we set up a strategy or an idea that could get us 20 times that amount? I said, worst comes to worst, we can still go back and use the same strategy, get a smaller amount. I was like, Exactly. It just didn't make sense to me, And so, all right. So what's one of the hard or fast business rules that you would advise all business leaders to break, to ignore?
I mean, I think in general, I'm not a big fan of layers, right? So I think it's really important to make yourself accessible. I try to make sure that all of our account executives know they can find me on LinkedIn. They can always reach out to me. I will respond to them. I'm very accessible and approachable, and I always, plan to maintain that. I think that a lot of people think that it makes them more important the harder they are to reach. And a silly example of this is LinkedIn. I see a lot of very prominent people on LinkedIn making it so you can only connect with them if you know their email address. Well, that's kind of,
I don't understand that.
I don't understand it either. So I just think, be open source in sharing your contacts with the right people, and also make yourself accessible, because you never know when you're going to meet someone extraordinary that you didn't know before. And then the second thing is, I'm a yes person. I start from a position of yes. So if I always try to say yes. I do this in parenting. I do this. Your no's mean a lot more if you say yes more often, right? It's the same at work. It's like, I try to start from a position of like, yeah, why don't I go to that event or that dinner? Like, who knows who I'll meet there? And that has proven to be wildly successful in terms of expanding my network. And I think that you're only as strong as your network.
So we did a show here a while back. I want to say it was in, I think, season 1, possibly season 2, with Todd Blue. So at the time he owned Indigo automotive company. It was an auto company, and they specialized. Their niche was all super luxury vehicles. So he did have some Mercedes or BMW stores, but that literally would be the low end of their things. It was Rolls, it was Lamborghini, it was all that type of stuff. So he was an enthusiast. And the reason he started in that niche is he knew what it took to make that type of client happy in terms of the customer experience. And where I was going with this is, one of the things that he said in that interview, and you had just said, is he wanted to start with yes. And it was a thing in his culture that he really wanted all his employees to understand, is start with yes, because the people we're selling to, they do not want to hear no.
Right. I like that.
And that's everybody. No one wants to hear no. We heard no as a kid. No one likes it.
That's true. It's true. And it also, I think that it opens you up to so many more opportunities. No is a guarantee that the door is closed, and yes, is the ticket to an open door. So.
All right. So what final thoughts do you have to help motivate business leaders out there? Or let's say, not just the business leaders who are already successful. I want you specifically to talk to the people who've got an idea, all right, and they haven't executed on it yet. They haven't put it into action. How do you motivate them to take that step and get going?
I think it's the same thing that you say to anyone who's stuck, whether they're stuck in a relationship or in a rut or in a career choice that they're not happy with. I really believe this. You have one life, and it's up to you to squeeze the most out of it in every area of your life. And just like someone else, you deserve that. And so if not you, who? Who is going to do that if not you? And it starts with believing that you are deserving of chasing your dreams just like the rest of us. And there's no better time to start than tomorrow or today, because, if you don't start for another 2 years, you'll wish you started 2 years ago.
That's awesome. Thank you, Samantha Ettus, for joining us on Move, Crush, Count. And I want to thank the MCC Nation for tuning in and listening to us today. I also want to thank J&L Marketing. If you want to move the crowd, crush the competition, count the money, then this is the digital and direct marketing agency for you. I want to thank them for sponsoring our show. For more Move, Crush, Count content, exclusive clips, and more from the world's top entrepreneurs, make sure you follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, or you can join our Facebook group or LinkedIn group by searching Move, Crush, Count. We'll see you on the next episode.